The silence in the first-class cabin of Flight 402 wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and filled with silent judgment. In Seat 1A sat 17-year-old Maya, wearing a vintage hoodie and noise-cancelling headphones, looking out the window. She wasn't disturbing anyone. She wasn't making a scene. But to the flight crew and the security team stomping down the jet bridge, she was a problem that needed to be removed. They saw a rebellious teenager sneaking into a world she didn't belong in. They saw a threat. What they didn't see was the phone in her hand, or the contact she was about to dial. They didn't know that the man on the other end of the line didn't just buy her the ticket. He owned the very contract that allowed this plane to take off. In 5 minutes, they would be screaming for her to get off. In 10 minutes, they would be begging her to stay. But by then, the engines would already be shutting down. The air conditioning on Sky High Airlines, Flight 402, hummed with that specific, sterile quiet reserved for the front of the plane. While the economy section back in rows 30 through 50 was a chaotic symphony of crying babies, rustling bags, and the click-clack of overhead bins, first class was a sanctuary. Crystal glasses clinked softly against the coasters. The scent of warm lavender towels filled the air, and right in the middle of it, in the most coveted seat on the plane, Seat 1A, sat Maya Sterling. Maya was 17, with voluminous curls pulled back into a loose bun and a faded, oversized grey hoodie that swallowed her slender frame. She looked like any other teenager heading home for spring break, except for the fact that she was sipping sparkling water from a crystal flute and scrolling through a physics textbook on her tablet. She looked comfortable. Too comfortable, according to Brenda. Brenda had been a lead flight attendant for 20 years. She wore her uniform like armor, her scarf tied with military precision, and her smile was as sharp as a razor. She prided herself on keeping her cabin pristine. To Brenda, first class wasn't just a seating arrangement. It was a social hierarchy, and Maya disrupted the aesthetic. Brenda stood in the galley, peering around the curtain at the girl. She turned to her junior colleague, Sarah. "Did you check her boarding pass?" Brenda whispered, her voice tight. Sarah looked up from the manifest, looking nervous. I think the gate agent did. She walked right on during pre-boarding. She walked right on, Brenda scoffed, adjusting her lapel pin. People like that don't just walk on to first class, Sarah. Look at her. She's wearing a hoodie that looks like it came from a thrift store. She's probably an economy upgrade who got confused, or worse, she's trying to pull a fast one for a TikTok video. I've seen it before. They sneak in, film a video, and refuse to leave. "She seems quiet, Brenda," Sarah said gently. "Maybe we should just check the manifest again." "I know my manifest," Brenda snapped. "Seat 1A is reserved for a VIP, usually a diplomat or a CAO, not a teenager." Brenda marched out of the galley. Her heels clicked with authority on the carpeted floor. She stopped right next to Maya's seat. Maya didn't look up. She was engrossed in a diagram of quantum mechanics. "Excuse me," Brenda said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. Maya didn't react. The noise-cancelling headphones were doing their job. Brenda's eye twitched. She reached out and tapped Maya firmly on the shoulder, harder than necessary. Maya flinched, pulling her headphones down around her neck. She looked up, her dark eyes wide with confusion. "Yes?" "I need to see your boarding pass," Brenda demanded, extending a manicured hand. She didn't say, "Please." She didn't smile. Maya blinked. "I scanned it at the gate. Is there a problem?" "The problem," Brenda said, leaning in closer so the wealthy couple in 2A and 2B could hear, "is that we have a discrepancy with the seat assignment. This cabin is for first-class passengers only. Economy is back through the curtain." Maya shifted in her seat, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The man in 2B, a heavy-set guy in a suit who looked like he'd already had 3 scotches, let out a loud sigh. "Come on, let's get this moving," Some of us have meetings." Maya reached for her phone to pull up the digital pass. "I am in first class, seat 1A. My name is Maya Sterling." Brenda didn't even look at the phone screen Maya was holding up. She looked at Maya's face. "Sweetheart, I don't think you understand. Seat 1A is a full fare ticket. It costs $6,000. Now I'm going to ask you nicely one time. Gather your things and head back to row 34. I'm sure your actual seat is waiting for you." "I'm not moving," Maya said, her voice shaking slightly but holding firm. "This is my seat. My father bought the ticket." Brenda laughed, a short, dry sound. "Your father? Did he use his miles?" "Look, if you don't move, I'm going to have to call security. And you don't want to be dragged off the plane in front of everyone, do you?" Maya looked around. The other passengers were staring. Some looked annoyed, others amused. No one looked sympathetic. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks, but she remembered what her dad had told her. Never let them see you sweat when you know you're right. "Call them," Maya said quietly, putting her headphones back on. Brenda's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed with her scarf. She spun around and marched to the interphone. "Captain, we have a non-compliant passenger in first class. I need security on board, now." 10 minutes passed. The plane sat idle at the gate. The air in the cabin was growing stale and hot. The murmurs of the passengers were getting louder. "Unbelievable," the man in 2B grumbled loudly. "One kid holds up the whole flight. Where are the parents?" Maya stared out the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wasn't reading her physics book anymore. She was staring at the tarmac, trying to control her breathing. She had texted her dad 3 minutes ago. "They're trying to kick me off. Sky-high flight, 402. They won't look at my ticket." The message was marked read, but there was no reply yet. Heavy footsteps thudded down the jet bridge. A moment later, 2 men entered the cabin. One was a younger TSA agent who looked bored. The other was an airport police officer, Officer Strickland. Strickland was a large man with a buzz cut and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He walked with a swagger, his hand resting casually on his belt near his taser. He didn't look at the passengers. He looked straight at Brenda. "Where is the disturbance?" Strickland asked, his voice booming. "Right here," Brenda said, pointing a finger at Maya like an accusation. "She refuses to return to her assigned seat. She's trespassing in first class and refusing crew instructions." Strickland turned his gaze to Maya. He didn't see a terrified 17-year-old girl. He saw a suspect. He saw defiance. He walked over to seat 1A and loomed over her, blocking out the overhead light. "Ma'am, you need to grab your bag and come with me." Maya took her headphones off again. "I have a ticket. Why won't anyone look at my ticket?" She held her phone up again, the QR code clearly visible, along with the words "First Class, Priority." Strickland swatted her hand away. The phone clattered onto the floor. A gasp went through the cabin. Maya froze. "I don't need to see your phone," Strickland spat. "I need you to comply. The flight crew has ordered you off the plane. That means you are now trespassing on private property. If you do not stand up in 3 seconds, I will physically remove you." "You dropped my phone," Maya whispered, tears welling in her eyes now. "And you are delaying a federal flight," Strickland countered. "Stand up, now." "This is ridiculous," a woman in row 3 shouted. "Just check her ticket, you brute." "Stay out of this, ma'am," Strickland barked without looking back. He grabbed Maya's upper arm. His grip was tight, painful. Maya yelped. "Get off me. I'm calling my dad." "You're not calling anyone," Strickland said, unholstering a pair of zip-tie handcuffs from his belt. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and resisting an officer." "I didn't do anything," Maya screamed, panic finally taking over. She tried to pull her arm back, but Strickland yanked her forward, nearly pulling her out of the seat. "That's it," Strickland growled. "You want to do this the hard way? Fine." He hauled her up. Maya stumbled, her hoodie bunching up around her neck. The humiliation was burning her alive. Every eye was on her. She felt like a criminal. Suddenly, A distinct, high-pitched ringtone cut through the tension. It wasn't Maya's phone on the floor. It was the flight deck intercom phone on the wall next to Brenda. It rang once, twice. The pilot, Captain Miller, stepped out of the cockpit, looking pale. He looked at the scene. Strickland manhandling the teenage girl, Brenda looking smug, the passengers looking horrified. "Officer Strickland!" Captain Miller shouted, his voice cracking. "Stop! Let her go!" Strickland froze, still gripping Maya's arm. "I've got the situation under control, Captain. Just removing the threat." "Let her go immediately," the captain yelled, rushing forward. He wasn't looking at Strickland. He was looking at Maya with sheer terror in his eyes. "Brenda, pick up her phone, now!" Brenda blinked, confused. "Captain?" "She's—" "Pick up the phone!" Miller roared. Brenda scrambled to pick up Maya's smartphone from the carpet. She handed it to the shaking girl. I don't understand," Strickland said, loosening his grip, but not letting go. "Captain, she's a trespasser." Captain Miller took a deep breath, wiping sweat from his forehead. He held up a hand to silence the officer. The entire cabin was dead silent. "Officer," Miller said, his voice trembling, "we just received a priority communication from air traffic control and a direct line from the CEO of Pegasus Logistics." Strickland frowned. "Who?" "The company that owns this aircraft," Miller said, looking at Maya. "This plane is leased, and the man on the phone just informed us that he is terminating the lease, effective immediately. He says we are currently assaulting his daughter." Maya rubbed her arm where Strickland had grabbed her. She looked at the officer, her eyes hardening. "I told you," she whispered, her voice cold. "I told you I was calling my dad." The silence that followed Captain Miller's announcement was heavier than the one before. It was the silence of a bomb having been diffused, only to reveal a second, larger timer ticking down to 0. Officer Strickland's hand fell from Maya's arm, as if he had been burned. He took a half-step back, his boots scuffing the carpet. The granite confidence in his face had cracked, replaced by a dull confusion. He looked at the captain, then at the girl in the hoodie, then back at the captain. "The lease?" Strickland repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Captain, I don't follow. This is a Sky High Airlines plane. I have authority here." "Not anymore, you don't," Captain Miller snapped, his usual calm pilot demeanor gone. He was looking at his iPad, which was pinging with a relentless stream of notifications. "Officer, get off the plane, now, and take your hands off Miss Sterling." Brenda, standing by the galley, looked like she was about to faint. She smoothed her scarf with trembling fingers. "Captain, surely there's a mistake. A teenager owning the plane? It's absurd." She was being disruptive. "You were just ending your career, Brenda," Maya spoke up. Her voice was steady now, though her hands were still shaking slightly as she rubbed her bruised arm. She didn't look at the crew. She looked straight ahead at the cockpit door. "My dad said he's not just cancelling the lease. He's invoking the breach of conduct clause. Immediate termination of service." Before Brenda could scoff, the plane gave a violent shudder. The hum of the air conditioning, the lifeline of the cabin, sputtered and died. The ambient overhead lights flickered once, twice, and then cut out completely, plunging the cabin into a dim, grey gloom, illuminated only by the sunlight streaming through the oval windows. A collective gasp went through the cabin. The heavy businessman in 2B sat up straight. "Hey, what happened to the AC? It's getting hot in here." Captain Miller stepped out of the cockpit fully, holding a radio. He looked defeated. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed the first-class cabin, his voice projecting without the intercom system, "I have just received a direct order from ground control and the aircraft owners. We have been denied engine start. The auxiliary power unit has been remotely disabled." "Disabled?" the woman in row 3 cried out. "By who?" Miller looked at Maya. "By the Sterling Group. They own the software that runs the avionics on this specific Boeing model. They just bricked the plane. We are dead in the water." The realization hit the room like a physical wave. The teenager in the hoodie, the one Brenda had treated like street trash, the one Strickland had manhandled, held the kill switch for the entire aircraft. Brenda turned to Maya, her face a mask of sudden, desperate politeness. "Miss Sterling," she stammered, forcing a terrified smile, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I was merely trying to protect the integrity of the cabin. If you could just call your father." Maya finally looked at her. The look wasn't angry. It was pitiful. "You didn't care about the integrity of the cabin. You cared about how I looked. You judged me the second I walked on." Maya picked up her noise-cancelling headphones. "And I can't call him to stop it. He's already here." Outside the window, the sound of screeching tires echoed up from the tarmac. The passengers in the A-seats leaned over to look. "Holy cow," the man in 2B whispered. Below, 3 matte black SUVs had bypassed security and were racing across the tarmac, flanked by 2 airport police cruisers that were escorting them, not stopping them. They screeched to a halt right next to the plane's front landing gear. The doors of the lead SUV opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a bespoke navy suit that cost more than Brenda made in a year. He didn't look up at the plane. He looked at his watch, then pointed at the jet bridge stairs. Strickland looked out the window and went pale. That's Robert Sterling." "Who is Robert Sterling?" Sarah, the junior flight attendant, whispered, clutching a tray of unserved orange juice. "He's not a celebrity," the businessman in 2B answered, his voice hushed with reverence. "He's the guy private equity firms call when they need to buy a country. He owns Pegasus Global. They supply the fuel, the leasing, and the logistics for half the airport." The plane was getting stiflingly hot. The air was thick with tension, and the smell of expensive perfume turning sour with sweat. "Open the door," Captain Miller ordered Brenda. "But we're not at the gate properly," Brenda argued weakly. "Open the damn door, Brenda," Miller yelled, "or he's going to rip it off the hinges." The jet bridge door hissed open. Usually the captain or the lead flight attendant stood there to greet VIPs. Today, Brenda backed away into the galley, trying to make herself invisible against the coffee machines. Officer Strickland stood in the aisle, his hand hovering near his belt, unsure whether to be a cop or a coward. Robert Sterling didn't storm onto the plane. He didn't yell. He walked in with a terrifying, icy calmness. He was followed by 2 other men in suits, lawyers carrying briefcases like weapons, and a massive personal security guard who made Strickland look like a mall cop. Robert scanned the cabin instantly. He ignored the captain. He ignored the gaping passengers. His eyes locked onto seat 1A. He saw the red mark on Maya's arm. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees, despite the broken AC. Robert walked straight to his daughter, kneeling on one knee in the aisle. "Maya," he said softly, his voice a stark contrast to the tension in the room. "Are you hurt?" Maya took a deep breath, fighting back the tears she had held in for the last 20 minutes. "He grabbed me, Dad. He tried to cuff me. They said I stole the ticket." Robert stood up. He turned slowly to face the room. His expression was unreadable, which made it infinitely more dangerous. He looked at Strickland. "You," Robert said. It wasn't a question. Strickland puffed out his chest, trying to regain some authority. "Sir, I am Officer Strickland of the airport police. I was responding to a disturbance call regarding a non-compliant passenger. I was following protocol." "Protocol," Robert repeated, testing the word. He took a step closer. "Does protocol involve assaulting a minor who holds a valid first-class ticket? Does protocol involve ignoring a verified boarding pass because you didn't like her hoodie?" "She refused to move," Strickland stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "The crew stated she was trespassing." Robert turned his gaze to Brenda. She was pressed against the galley wall, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a freight train. "And you must be the crew," Robert said, walking over to her. The 2 lawyers behind him opened their briefcases and pulled out documents, clicking pens in unison. I made a mistake," Brenda whispered. I assumed. You assumed? Robert cut her off. Let me tell you what I assume. I assume you saw a young black girl in a seat you didn't think she could afford, and you decided to humiliate her. No, it wasn't that, Brenda cried, looking to the passengers for support. None came. The man in 2B was filming the entire thing on his phone. Robert reached out his hand, and one of the lawyers placed a document in it. Robert held it up. This, Robert said, his voice projecting clearly to the entire cabin, is the operating contract between Sky High Airlines and Pegasus Global Leasing. It covers the aircraft, the jet bridge usage, and the fuel line connection. He looked at Captain Miller. Captain, I apologize for the inconvenience to your flight record. But as of 5 minutes ago, Sky High Airlines is in default of their payment terms due to a violation of the Passenger Safety and Dignity Clause, which I had personally written into the contract for my family's travel. Default? Captain Miller asked, horrified. Sir, that means— It means, Robert said, turning back to Brenda, that I am repossessing this aircraft, right now. You can't do that, Brenda shrieked. There are people on board. I can. And I did, Robert said coldly. My team is already filing the injunction. The fuel trucks have been ordered away. The gate power is cut. This plane is now a heavy metal paperweight. He turned back to Maya and extended his hand. Come on, Maya, we're leaving. But what about us? The woman in row 3 asked, panic rising in her voice. We have connections. We have places to go. Robert paused. He looked at the passengers. My quarrel is not with you. It is with Sky High Airlines and their staffing choices. My assistants at the gate will issue vouchers for Delta and American flights leaving within the hour for all first-class passengers who were inconvenienced by this display. He paused, looking at the man in 2B. Except for you, sir. I saw you laughing when the officer grabbed her. You can walk. The man in 2B went red and slumped in his seat. Robert put his arm around Maya's shoulders and guided her towards the door. As they reached the threshold, Strickland stepped in their path. Sir, you can't just leave, Strickland said, desperate to assert control. I have a police report to file. She was resisting arrest. Robert stopped. He looked at the personal security guard behind him. The guard stepped forward, towering over Strickland. Officer Strickland, Robert said, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Strickland and Brenda could hear. I know the Chief of Airport Police. We play golf on Sundays. I'm going to have a very long conversation with him about your protocols. And as for you, he looked at Brenda. You wanted my daughter out of first class. Congratulations. You just grounded the entire fleet. Robert guided Maya out of the plane and onto the jet bridge. Behind them, the chaos truly began. As they walked away, Maya could hear Brenda sobbing and the passengers erupting into shouts of anger, not at Maya, but at the flight attendant who had just cost them their trip. Dad, Maya said softly as they walked towards the terminal, did you really buy the plane? No, Robert said, adjusting his cuffs. I already owned it. I just decided I didn't want to rent it to people like that anymore. They walked into the terminal, but the drama wasn't over. The airport was buzzing. The cancellation of Flight 402 had triggered a domino effect, and the airport manager was running down the concourse towards them, looking like a man whose world was ending. Karma was just warming up. By the time Robert and Maya reached the main concourse of Terminal 4 at JFK, the digital world was already burning down Sky High Airlines. It had started with the businessman in seat 2B. Despite Robert's snub, the man had uploaded the video he recorded. He captioned it simply, "Flight attendant bullies teen in first class. Turns out the teen's dad owns the plane. Watch the instant regret. #SkyHigh, #Karma." Within 20 minutes, it had 40,000 views. By the time Robert and Maya were walking past the duty-free shops, it had hit 2 million. Maya pulled her phone out. Her notifications were a solid blur of light. "Dad," she whispered, stopping in the middle of the walkway. "Look." Robert glanced at the screen. The video showed everything. Brenda's sneering face, Strickland's aggressive manhandling, the way they treated Maya like a criminal, and then the glorious shift when Captain Miller ran out, terrified. "So the internet works fast," Robert noted dryly. "Good. It saves me the trouble of issuing a press release." Just then, a frantic figure came sprinting towards them, dodging travelers. It was Mr. Henderson, the general manager of the airport. He was a balding man who usually sat in a quiet office. Right now, he looked like he was having a cardiac event. "Mr. Sterling! Mr. Sterling, please!" Henderson gasped, blocking their path. He was flanked by two nervous-looking customer service agents. "We need to talk. You can't just seize an aircraft in the middle of the holiday rush." "I didn't seize it, Henderson," Robert said, not breaking stride, forcing the manager to shuffle backward. "I terminated a lease due to a gross violation of terms. Your tenants assaulted a passenger. That passenger happens to be my daughter. We can fix this," Henderson pleaded. "I'll get the chief of police down here. We'll get Strickland suspended, pending an investigation. I'll get Brenda fired immediately. Just, please, authorize the fuel trucks to return. We have 300 people stranded on that jet." Robert stopped. He looked at Henderson with eyes like flint. "You think this is about one flight? Henderson, look at the screens." Robert pointed up at the massive departures board hanging over the terminal. Usually it was a list of times and gate numbers, but right now a strange phenomenon was occurring. Every flight listed under Sky High Airlines, flights to London, Paris, Tokyo, was flashing red. Cancelled, cancelled, cancelled. What is that?" Henderson whispered, his face draining of colour. "My legal team is efficient," Robert said calmly. "Pegasus Global leases the avionics software for Sky High's entire fleet, not just Flight 402. We just revoked the license for the whole airline. Every Sky High plane currently on the ground is now grounded. Permanently." You shut down the whole airline?" Maya asked, her eyes wide. "I told you, sweetheart," Robert said, smoothing her hair. "Actions have consequences." Back at Gate 12, the scene was chaotic. Brenda was no longer standing tall. She was being escorted up the jet bridge by two uniformed Port Authority officers, not for protection, but because the angry mob of passengers was threatening to tear her apart. As she emerged into the terminal, weeping and hiding her face with her scarf, a crowd of onlookers held up their phones, filming her walk of shame. "That's her! That's the racist one!" someone shouted. "You ruined our vacation!" a mother yelled, holding a crying baby. Brenda looked up, her mascara running down her face, and saw the giant news monitors in the waiting area. CNN was already running the footage from the plane. The headline read, "Sky High shutdown. Billionaire father grounds fleet after daughter profiled." Brenda's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the terminal carpet, sobbing. She knew, in that moment, she wouldn't just lose her job. She would never work in the industry again. She was the face of the most expensive PR disaster in aviation history. Nearby, Officer Strickland was trying to sneak away towards the employee exit. He didn't make it. Two of his superiors, the actual lieutenants of the airport police, intercepted him. They didn't speak. One of them simply reached out and ripped the badge off Strickland's chest. "Gun and taser, now," the lieutenant ordered. "Come on, Mike," Strickland pleaded, his voice high and pathetic. "I was just doing my job." "You assaulted a minor on camera, Strickland," the lieutenant spat, "and you did it to Robert Sterling's kid. You're not just fired. You're facing charges." Strickland was handcuffed in front of the very passengers he had tried to intimidate. The applause that erupted from the terminal was deafening. The next morning, the crisis had escalated from a viral video to a global financial meltdown. Sky High Airlines stock had plummeted 60% overnight. Trading had been halted on the New York Stock Exchange. In a desperate attempt to save the company, Arthur Pendergast, the CEO of Sky High Airlines, called an emergency press conference. He chose to hold it at the airport hotel's grand ballroom, hoping to show he was on the ground dealing with the issue. The room was packed. Journalists from the BBC, the New York Times, and and Fox News jostled for position. The flashbulbs were blinding. Arthur Pendergast walked onto the stage. He was a slick man with silver hair and a smile that usually charmed investors. Today, he looked like a man walking to the gallows. He approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Yesterday, a regrettable incident occurred on Flight 402. While we apologize for the misunderstanding regarding a passenger's seat, we must emphasize that our crew was following standard security protocols regarding unidentified passengers." "Liar!" "Oh." A voice rang out from the back of the room. The cameras whipped around. Robert Sterling stood at the double doors. He wasn't alone. He was with Maya, who looked composed and strong, dressed in a sharp blazer. Behind them stood a phalanx of lawyers. Robert walked down the center aisle. The reporters parted like the Red Sea. "Mr. Sterling," Pendergast said, sweating under the stage lights, "this is a private press conference. If you wish to discuss a settlement—" "I don't want your money, Arthur," Robert said, stepping up to the stage. He didn't take the podium. He stood next to it, overpowering the CEO with sheer presence. "I have plenty of my own. I'm here to correct the record." Robert turned to the press. "Mr. Pendergast just told you his crew followed protocol. I have the flight logs here." Robert tossed a thick file onto the podium. It landed with a heavy thud. "These logs show that my daughter scanned her ticket 3 times. The system cleared her 3 times. Your flight attendant, Brenda, manually overrode the system to mark her as a standby passenger after she was already seated. That is not protocol. That is fraud." A gasp went through the room. The reporters started typing furiously. "And," Robert continued, his voice rising, "your security officer, Strickland, falsified his report. He claimed my daughter was violent. The airport security cameras, which my team subpoenaed this morning, show she was reading a book until he put his hands on her." Pendergast was trembling. "Robert, please, let's discuss this in private. We can reinstate the flights. We can fire the crew. Just turn the avionics back on. You're bankrupting us." "I'm not bankrupting you, Arthur," Robert said coldly. "You did that yourself when you built a company culture that allows employees to treat people like garbage based on how they dress or the color of their skin." Robert turned back to the cameras. "I am announcing today that Pegasus Global is permanently severing all ties with Sky High Airlines. Furthermore, we are filing a class action lawsuit on behalf of every passenger who was delayed or mistreated by this airline in the last 10 years. My firm will cover the legal fees. Anyone who has a story like Maya's, we want to hear it." The room erupted. This was the death blow. A class action suit funded by a billionaire would bury the airline in litigation for decades. Pendergast slumped over the podium, burying his head in his hands. He knew it was over. The board would fire him before lunch. The company would be liquidated by the end of the week. Maya stepped forward towards the microphone. Robert stepped back to let her speak. She looked at the cameras, her face projected on every news screen in the country. "Yesterday," Maya said, her voice clear and unwavering, "a woman told me I didn't look like I belonged in first class. She thought power looked like a uniform and a loud voice." Maya looked over at Pendergast, who was defeated, and then at the camera. She was wrong. Power is knowing who you are, even when people try to make you feel small. And for anyone else who has ever been told to move to the back of the plane, stay in your seat. You bought the ticket. The silence in the room lasted for a heartbeat, and then the journalists broke professional protocol. They started clapping. Robert smiled at his daughter. The airline was dead. The bad actors were ruined. But the story wasn't quite over. There was one final piece of the puzzle, the aftermath and the new beginning that would rise from the ashes of Sky High Airlines. The collapse of Sky High Airlines didn't happen with a whimper. It happened with the violent, screeching halt of a train derailment. In the weeks following the incident on Flight 402, the aviation industry watched in stunned silence as the once mighty carrier was dismantled piece by piece. Robert Sterling kept his promise. He didn't just sue the airline. He launched a scorched earth legal campaign that targeted every level of their incompetence. The class action lawsuit, funded by the limitless coffers of Pegasus Global, uncovered a decade of negligence, discriminatory hiring practices, and safety protocol violations that Sky High had swept under the rug. Arthur Pendergast, the CEO who had tried to smooth things over with a press conference, was the first casualty. He was summoned to a board meeting 48 hours after the viral video hit 10 million views. He didn't even make it to his chair. The board of directors, terrified of personal liability, voted unanimously to terminate his contract without severance. Pendergast was escorted out of the building by his own security team, clutching a cardboard box containing a stapler and a photo of a boat he would soon have to sell. His reputation was so toxic that his calls to other Fortune 500 companies went unanswered. He retired to a small condo in Florida, a pariah in the world he used to rule. But while the corporate suits lost their bonuses, the hard karma hit the individuals on the ground with the force of a hurricane. Brenda had spent 20 years curating an image of perfection. Her uniform was always pressed, her lipstick always red, her authority absolute. She believed she was untouchable. She was wrong. Sky High fired her via email while she was still crying in the terminal bathroom. But the firing was the least of her problems. The internet had branded her. Her face, sneering at Maya, pointing a manicured finger, was everywhere. It was a meme. It was a thumbnail on news sites. It was a symbol of everything wrong with the service industry. For 3 months, Brenda applied to every airline in North America. She applied to Delta, United, American, even the budget carriers that charged for water. The response was always the same: silence. Finally, she landed an interview with a small charter company in Ohio. She spent her last savings on a plane ticket to get there, hoping for a fresh start. The hiring manager, a young woman named Chloe, looked at Brenda's resume and then looked up at her face. Chloe's eyes widened. She slowly turned her laptop screen around. It was paused on the video of Flight 402. "We can't hire you," Chloe said, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Our insurance premiums would triple if we put you in a cabin. You're a liability, Brenda. You're the woman who grounded a fleet." Brenda walked out into the cold Ohio rain, realized she had no return ticket and no money for a hotel. 6 months later, the woman who used to sip champagne in the galley while judging passengers was working the lunch rush at Burger Blitz, a greasy fast food joint off the New Jersey Turnpike. The polyester uniform scratched her skin. The smell of old frying oil clung to her hair, replacing the scent of expensive duty-free perfume. One Tuesday afternoon, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the drive-through window. Brenda, exhausted and sporting a grease burn on her forearm, opened the sliding window. "That'll be $12.52, she droned, not looking up. A hand extended a platinum credit card. Brenda took it. The name on the card read Thomas Carlyle. She froze. She knew that name. She looked up. Sitting in the driver's seat was the heavy-set businessman from Seat 2B, the man who had originally sided with her, the man she had tried to impress by kicking Maya out. He looked at her. He squinted, adjusting his sunglasses. Then a look of recognition dawned on his face, followed immediately by a cruel, mocking smirk. "Well, well," Carlyle chuckled, "how the mighty have fallen. From first class to fries, huh?" Brenda felt the tears pricking her eyes. "Sir, please, just take your food." "I don't think I want it anymore," Carlyle said, retracting his card. "I'm not sure the hygiene standards here are up to protocol." He laughed, a loud, barking laugh that echoed in the drive-through lane, and sped off, leaving Brenda standing there with a bag of cold burgers. Her manager, a 19-year-old kid named Kevin, shouted from the back, "Brenda, stop stalling the line. You're on thin ice." Brenda slid the window shut, leaned her forehead against the cool glass, and let the reality of her new life wash over her. She had treated people like garbage because she thought she was better than them. Now, the world had put her exactly where she belonged. If Brenda's punishment was social and economic, Officer Strickland's was judicial. He had expected a slap on the wrist. He was a cop, after all. He thought the blue wall of silence would protect him. He thought wrong. Robert Sterling's lawyers didn't just go after the airline. They went after the municipality. They argued that Strickland's actions constituted a hate crime and false imprisonment. The district attorney, sensing the political wind blowing against him, decided not to offer a plea deal. Strickland went to trial. The courtroom was packed. Maya sat in the front row, wearing a simple white blouse, holding her father's hand. Strickland sat at the defense table, wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit, looking small and deflated. The trial lasted 3 days. The evidence was damning. The security footage from the gate showed Maya calmly reading. The audio from the cabin showed Strickland escalating the situation within seconds. But the nail in the coffin was Strickland's own body cam footage, which his defense team had tried to suppress. The prosecutor played the clip on the big screen. The jury watched as Strickland sneered, "I don't need to see your phone. I need you to comply." They heard the sound of the handcuffs clicking. They saw the fear in a 17-year-old girl's eyes. When the verdict was read, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Guilty on all counts, assault in the 3rd degree, unlawful restraint, and official misconduct. The judge, a stern woman who had no patience for bullies with badges, looked over her spectacles at Strickland. "Mr. Strickland," she said, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls, "you were given a badge to protect the public. Instead, you used it as a weapon to intimidate a child because you didn't like the way she looked. You are a disgrace to the uniform." "Your Honor, I have a family," Strickland pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "I was just following orders." "You were following your own prejudice," the judge snapped. "I sentence you to 18 months in state prison, followed by 3 years of probation. You are permanently barred from holding any position in law enforcement or private security." As the bailiff clicked the handcuffs onto Strickland's wrists, real handcuffs, tight and cold, Strickland looked back at the gallery. He locked eyes with Maya. He expected to see gloating. He expected to see anger. Instead, he saw nothing. Maya just watched him with a calm, detached indifference. He was no longer a monster to her. He was just a sad, broken man who had made a terrible mistake. He was led away, the door clicking shut behind him, sealing his fate. While the old world rotted, Robert Sterling was busy building a new one. The assets of Sky High Airlines went up for auction in a bankruptcy court in Delaware. The fleet of Boeings, the terminal leases at JFK and Heathrow, the maintenance hangars. It was all on the block. There were other bidders, hedge funds that wanted to strip the planes for parts, budget carriers that wanted the gate slots. But every time a bid went up, Robert Sterling's representative raised his paddle. He outbid them all. He bought the entire defunct airline for pennies on the dollar, paying a fraction of what the company had been worth before he destroyed it. But he didn't just buy it to kill it. He bought it to transform it. For 4 months, the hangars at JFK were hives of activity. The faded, peeling blue paint of Sky High was sanded away. In its place, a deep, majestic navy blue was applied, with gold accents sweeping down the fuselage. The tail fin didn't feature a bird or a globe. It featured a simple, elegant compass rose. The interiors were gutted. The cramped economy seats were replaced with ergonomically designed chairs with extra legroom. The rigid class dividers were softened. The toxic management culture was fumigated. Robert hired a new CEO, a woman named Elena Rodriguez, who had started as a baggage handler 20 years ago and worked her way up, only to be passed over for promotion at Sky High because she didn't fit the image. She knew how to run an airline with heart. And then there was the staff. Robert and Elena instituted a blind hiring process for the first wave of crew members. Names, photos, and backgrounds were redacted. They hired based on aptitude, empathy, and psychological stability. Sarah, the young flight attendant who had tried to warn Brenda on that fateful day, was one of the first to be called. She had been terrified she would be blacklisted too. Instead, she was offered the position of Director of Guest Experience. 6 months to the day of the incident, the newly christened Sterling Airways prepared for its maiden voyage, Flight 101, New York to London. Gate 12 at JFK had been transformed. There were no harsh fluorescent lights. Instead, there was warm lighting, soft music, and comfortable seating for everyone, not just the VIPs. A podium stood at the entrance to the jet bridge. A massive crowd had gathered, reporters, industry analysts, and curious travelers. The buzz was electric. Robert Sterling stepped up to the microphone. He looked different than he had that day on the plane. He looked lighter. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert began, "a wise person once told me that if you don't like how the table is set, you should buy the restaurant." The crowd chuckled. "We bought the restaurant," Robert continued, "but we aren't just serving different food. We are serving a different philosophy. For too long, air travel has been about exclusion. It has been about who can pay the most to be treated like a human being. Sterling Airways is different. Here, dignity is included in the price of the ticket." He paused and turned to his right. "But I didn't build this alone. I'd like to introduce the president of our new charitable wing, the Open Skies Foundation. My daughter, Maya Sterling." Maya stepped forward. The camera flashes popped like fireworks. She looked older, wiser. She wore a sharp navy blazer over a simple t-shirt. "Thank you," Maya said, her voice steady and projecting confidence. "6 months ago, I was told I didn't belong in Seat 1A. I was told that my hoodie and my headphones made me a threat. Today we are launching the Future Pilots Scholarship. We are taking 50 kids from neighborhoods just like the one my dad grew up in, and we are paying for their flight school. We are going to fill the cockpits of the future with people who look like all of us." The applause was deafening. It wasn't polite applause. It was raucous, emotional cheering. "Now," Maya smiled, cutting the gold ribbon with a pair of ceremonial scissors, "I believe we have a plane to catch." "One." Maya and Robert walked down the jet bridge together. It was the same physical structure, the same metal and glass, but the ghosts of the past were gone. They stepped onto the aircraft. The crew was lined up, smiling, genuinely smiling. Sarah was there, holding a tray of beverages. When she saw Maya, she didn't bow or scrape. She just winked. "Welcome aboard, Miss Sterling," Sarah said warmly. "Right this way." Maya walked down the aisle. The cabin was beautiful. The air smelled of fresh leather and citrus. The lighting was a calming amber hue. She stopped at row 1, Seat 1A. It was a wide, plush leather seat that could recline into a bed. It was a throne, but it didn't feel like a symbol of separation anymore. It felt like a victory lap. Maya tossed her backpack into the overhead bin, the same backpack Strickland had claimed was suspicious. She sat down. She adjusted the window shade. She looked out at the tarmac, where the ground crew was giving the thumbs up. Robert sat in 1B. He buckled his seatbelt and looked over at her. "How does it feel?" he asked quietly. Maya ran her hand over the armrest. She thought about Brenda serving burgers. She thought about Strickland in his cell. She thought about the 50 kids who would get scholarship letters next week. "It feels like justice," Maya said. She reached into her bag and pulled out her old, battered, noise-cancelling headphones. She put them on, but this time she didn't turn the music on immediately. She wanted to hear the sound of the engines. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. A new pilot, a woman's voice this time. "Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Sterling Airways Flight 101. Our flight time to London will be 6 hours and 30 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. You're in good hands." The engines roared to life. The plane began to taxi. As they gathered speed, pressing Maya back into her seat, she watched the airport blur past. They lifted off, defying gravity, rising above the clouds, above the hate, above the petty judgments of small people. Maya Sterling closed her eyes and smiled. They were finally flying. And that is the incredible, true-to-life drama of how one moment of discrimination brought down an entire airline empire. It's a story that reminds us that karma isn't just a concept. It's a boomerang. Brenda and Strickland thought they could judge Maya based on her appearance, assuming her silence was weakness. They learned the hard way that the quietest people often have the loudest power. They tried to kick a queen off her throne, only to find out her father owned the castle. This story serves as a lesson to everyone. Treat every single person with respect, whether they are wearing a suit or a hoodie, because you never know who you are talking to. In a world where you can be anything, be kind, because if you aren't, the internet and a billionaire dad might just cancel you. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this story. If you felt the satisfaction of that justice, please hit the like button. It helps the channel more than you know. Share this video with someone who needs to see a bully get what they deserve. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss our next story. What would you have done if you were Robert Sterling? Would you have bought the airline or done something else? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, stay kind, and I'll see you in the next video.